so much again for joining me on this channel. As always, I'm very grateful for all your previous views, likes and subscriptions. I thought we'd spend time thinking about Buddhism and the Sangha. And what strikes me is that the word Sangha has two meanings. Okay, it means community, but it has two levels to it. First of all, Sangha can refer to all Buddhists who are trying to follow the Noble Eightfold Path and are striving to achieve enlightenment. And secondly, Sangha can mean all those who've made a commitment to being a monk or a nun in the Buddhist faith. And I think that's really useful to know. Another thing that's quite interesting as well is that if someone wishes to be a monk or a nun, it doesn't have to be for life. Often we associate monks and nuns with the Christian tradition, and more often than not, it's something you become permanently attached to, isn't it? You become a monk for the rest of your life, you become a nun for the rest of your life. In Buddhism, you can sort of drop in and out, as it were. So you can go, well, I'm going to be live like a monk for a couple of years or so, maybe even a couple of months, and for others, of course, it will be a lifelong commitment. So I think that's really interesting. And I think another thing as well is, why are communities so important in religion, and in our broader thinking about religions and why communities are important? It's just worth thinking about that and playing around how it can connect people, how it can give a sense of community, but at a much richer level than just friendships. There is a binding that goes on with a deeper spiritual purpose. And I think one of the things that's really fascinating as well is, if you think about monks and nuns in Buddhism, they have a very, very simple life. They will have their robes that they wear. They might have another robe just as a spare, have a razor to shave their head to symbolize a simple life. They'll have a cup and a bowl for food, a needle and thread just to make sure as well that they can repair their robes, and a strainer, like a little tea strainer as it were, and that will be used to remove any sort of small insects from their food or from their drink, because they want to make sure that they're not harming life. At this point, somebody will be thinking, well, how do they get by financially? Well, they're not allowed to sort of handle money, as it were, but through alms, ALMS, which is quite an old-fashioned word, members of the public and that will donate money just to sustain the livelihood of the monks. And like many communities or religions, there are some rules or expectations. And in Buddhism, these are called the 5 precepts. Now, these are something that are followed by all Buddhists, not just monks and nuns. And the precepts are perhaps fairly standard. If you've been lucky enough to investigate religions for as long as I have, or know a little bit about, they're all fairly straightforward. So to not kill, remember we talked about Buddhist monks having a strainer that includes all living creatures, to not steal, to avoid improper sexual acts, to not use improper speech, and of course to avoid intoxication. So excessive alcohol can often lead to many problems, if any of you've been to an A&E on a Friday night in the UK. But I think what's also interesting is that Buddhists have another 5 further precepts, okay, which monks and nuns, okay, will follow. So they won't eat after midday. There's no music or dancing, no jewelry or perfume, no luxurious beds, and no accepting of money as gifts. Okay, alms, okay, and you know, it's fine, but money is gifts to sort of put in your robe pocket and to buy the latest gadget from Apple, that's a no. But it got me thinking as to why extra ones for nuns and monks, and maybe it's to mark them out more specially, maybe it's to help them be more rigorous in their life there in the Buddhist monastery. I don't quite have an answer myself, but maybe that's something you would like to think about during your studies. And it's interesting as well how you know, monks, bhikkhus and nuns, bukinis, are equal. In other words, anyone can become part of that Sangha and being a nun or a monk. There's no gender distinction, as it were. And I think that's very interesting. So I'll think about the inclusivity of Buddhism. And of course, we're all familiar with the orange robes. And it's like a classic motif, isn't it? It's something which is iconic. It's like a classic religious motif, and that orange is something which I was reading up on it. There's a couple of things that it was perhaps the most available dye at the time for Buddhists to use, and also it perhaps ties in as well with that purity of a flame, a fire, and a candle can often be used in meditation, can't we? Look at that fire being used as purifying as well. And certainly as well, the Dalai Lama, who is the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, where you have the orange sashes, he's also become someone who has sort of become a figurehead for Buddhism in general, not just his own particular sect of Tibetan Buddhism, but he has those very distinctive robes as well. And I suppose if you're a marketing person, it must be a dream come true if you can get your brand associated with a particular colour. So think about the purple of Cadbury's, or in the 90s when Pepsi changed from red to just blue to try and make itself different from Coca-Cola. I always think of that beautiful, vibrant orange as something which is associated with Buddhism and the Dalai Lama. So, thank you so much for watching and listening. As always, I'm very grateful for that. And as always, enjoy your learning.